Welcome, everyone, to the Inclusion Podcast. I'm Dr. Julie Costin.
And I'm Dr. Christy Preddy-Franzak. We're so glad you're here as we explore all things inclusion.
So whether you're a school leader, an educator, a parent, or simply passionate about inclusion, this podcast is for you.
In each episode, we go beyond the usual conversations, diving into what truly makes inclusive education work.
Together, let's make a difference, one conversation at a time. Here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Inclusion Podcast. So, here's what happens when Christy and I meet with school leaders. They often say to us, we believe in inclusion. But then we look closely at their schedules, we look at their service delivery maps, we look at their practices, and the system itself tells a different story. The system basically says, we don't believe in inclusion. So today's episode, what we're doing is we're sharing 7 simple indicators that reveal whether a system is truly inclusive or just trying to be, or just hoping to be, or just wishing it was inclusive. And along the way, we're going to share exactly what leaders can do to support a truly inclusive system.
Yeah, so we love this episode because we get to talk about kind of the bigger picture. And Julie, I thought we could, before we dive into the 7 indicators, we should probably tell people a little bit about where this came from. And so it comes from our book. Of course, we're going to link to anything Julie and I reference in the show notes for this special episode. But just to back up for a minute, along with several of our co-authors, Julie and I wrote a book, The Way to Inclusion. And it has 7 chapters and it has 7 milestones. And then we realized it has at least 7 barriers, right, Julie? 7 ways that, like, we love to be strength-based and positive, but it was like, oh, we can actually see where you're not inclusive by these 7 indicators.
That's right. That's right. And so these indicators, when we get into them, are kind of written in this form called, you know, you're not inclusive if. So I think it's going to be really fun for folks to even get out a piece of paper and just think about each and every one of them as we go. So as Christy said, this comes from our book, The Way to Inclusion, How Leaders Create Schools Where Every Student Belongs. And if you don't have that book, I think it is a really, really useful piece of writing that is simple, to the point, and it's just made for school leaders who want to create a more inclusive school system.
And if you do have the book, go grab it now, because each of the 7 indicators we talk about in this episode will align with each chapter. So it'll help you out. So let's do a couple, Julie, and then we'll talk about what the download is for this episode and things like that.
Okay. So 7 ways to know your school or district isn't inclusive. So you know you're not inclusive if you were to ask 5 leaders in your district to define inclusion, and they would all do it in absolutely different ways.
I was teasing Julie yesterday because we have this slide. I don't know, Julie, I don't even know what year you created it, but at the time of this recording, you and I have been together for 6 years. So It's at least 6 years old. And she has this slide that's showing service delivery. And it's in the before phase, there's this image on the slide that says inclusive classroom, or teachers that are doing inclusion. There's some little thing. And we always say, hey, people, what's wrong with this picture? If you see, kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, unfortunately, you still see these pull out self-contained rooms. And then you see the inclusion classroom. To me, Julie, when people don't know what you mean when you say, what's wrong with this? Or when we keep seeing districts that say, we're inclusive, we have this inclusive classroom, or we have this grade level that's co-teaching, so we're inclusive. To me, that's the evidence of this indicator. Can you kind of bring that for people, like what I mean by that?
Yeah. So if you have to delineate a classroom as inclusive, it means the rest of your classrooms aren't. And so you don't have full scale inclusion. It's like being a little bit pregnant. It's like you're not a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. You're either inclusive or you're not. And so in this particular, Christy's laughing.
Sorry. I've
I
never heard you
surprised
say
her.
that one before.
No,
But
but
it's really true, right? It's
it's
like
true.
not just a little bit inclusive by co-teaching in third grade.
That's right. And so this concept, this first one is like if you ask a bunch of school leaders what inclusion means and they have five very different ideas, we know that we have not come together and decided our definition of inclusion and what we mean by it, which means we're going to struggle to achieve it if we don't even know where we're headed.
Yeah, and before we move on to the second indicator, because I know we don't want this episode to be, a 2 hour webinar like we usually do,
Uh-huh.
but the idea is that if you aren't clear on your definition, then your decisions will not be in alignment. You'll
Yes.
say, oh, we can be inclusive by having just one co-taught classroom and that makes us inclusive, right? So, or like we can look at our LRE data and we can say, we're doing inclusion better because we are at 48% or something like that. That's
Hmm.
like I'm 48% pregnant, right? I'm going to
Right.
use your analogy, which I'm
Yeah.
not going to do well about, but it's like I just think having inclusion be a goal is kind of strange and or having a percent of how inclusive you are is kind
Mhm.
of strange. But anyway.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's a mindset, it's a heart set, it's a skill set. Your systems would be aligned in every single aspect of it. So it's very important to have the conversation and get aligned with what the definition of inclusion is. Now, in the show notes, we will also put the definition of inclusive education that we offer as a starting place for you. You could take it, whole scale adopt it, and move ahead, or you can make tweaks to it for your specific school system. Okay. The second, you're not inclusive if is that students with disability labels have less access to general education classrooms, curriculum, or extracurricular life.
So, Julie, let's give two examples. I'll give a pre-K or early childhood example, and then you can maybe give one even about cohorts or something.
Hmm.
Okay. So, this is indicator number two of you're not inclusive if. So, oftentimes in early childhood, 3-year-olds are in the most restrictive placements, partially because a school district has to serve three, fours, and of course, 5-year-olds who have qualified for special education under IDEA. Depending on your state, you may serve 4-year-olds, but it's usually still under an entitlement program of something under your universal pre-K, which I'm using air quotes and you can't see me because universal pre-K would mean everyone, not just 4-year-olds who meet some sort of qualification. So anyway, side note,
Hmm.
but that leaves out 3-year-olds. We don't routinely serve in most districts in the United States 3-year-olds who don't qualify. So that means it becomes very challenging, Julie, to find a least restrictive environment. It's actually not hard to find because you could use homes, childcares, Head Starts. They're easy to find, but harder for us to think about how do we deliver services and specially designed instruction because of a whole other host. So that's one example of if you know that because a child has autism or developmental delay and is 3, they will have less access to their community childcare or Head Start or even a faith-based program, then you're not inclusive. That's
Yeah.
my example.
That's a good example. I'll take what I'd like you to do is just think across all general education environments. And so if you're teaching in a middle school and there is Spanish class, there's French class, there's um, AP bio, there's all these different courses. What you want to do is take a look to say, all right, if we have 12% of our population are kids with disabilities, then we'd expect in every one of those classrooms, we
Mm.
would have about 12% of our kids having disabilities. And I can talk a lot about why that doesn't happen, but essentially that's the test to say, hey, are we really, really, really inclusive? And if that's the case, you'd expect any. So if there's a school play, you'd expect 12% of the students to be in that school play of kids with disabilities. If there's a football team, if there's a dance, if there's, right, you play with this concept and say, hey, I cannot see kids with disabilities represented at all in X. And that's the place where you do some work to think about how do we make that more inclusive.
And Julie, maybe you could just take that one step further because people
Hmm.
will say, oh, sure, students with disabilities can, have a coffee club or they can, you know, be
Mm.
in Special Olympics.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. So, yeah. So, we're not talking about segregated things like um, a coffee cart where kids with disabilities travel around
or
the school
adaptive PE.
or adaptive PE. We're definitely not talking about that. What we're meaning is in natural proportions to students without disabilities. So if we're saying 12%, we're meaning the rest of the group are kids without disabilities. And I think that's a really key factor in understanding least restrictive environment because the goal is for students with and without disabilities to be together. So, Christy, when you say something like a coffee cart, usually those are run by kids with disabilities, maybe with a teaching assistant to support that. And that is highly segregated. Okay. So it's the opposite of inclusion.
Yeah. Okay. And Julie, that makes me think I'll put some show notes about LRE episodes so that if
Hmm.
we've opened a can of worm with indicator number two,
Hmm.
people have a place to go. All right.
Hmm.
Let's do number three.
You know that you aren't inclusive if your vision statement says all students, but no one really can explain what that means in practice. In fact, we often see vision statements where we capitalize the word all, right? A
Right.
L L,
All means all.
all. But when we work with that school system, they go, sorry. We didn't mean the kids with autism that don't use verbal communication. And we're like, oh, because all to me meant all. Nope, we don't actually mean, and what they are, they'll tell you who is not given access to general education content, curriculum, and peers. And so we've got to figure out what all means and how to make all happen.
Yeah. So here's another quick way to ask the question, Julie.
Hmm.
If you say, "Hey, District ABC, how
Hmm.
many kids are in out of district placements, out of,
Right.
like, or served by a regional entity?"
Correct.
Then you would be like, "Oh, we mean all of our students except for the 18 that we ship to, or bus, sorry, bus
Hmm.
to."
Hmm.
So I think, there are historical realities about why we've done that in the past. But our argument is, and as you'll read in chapter 3 of The Way to Inclusion, is that this is another indicator that all doesn't really actually mean all, and you don't have a common or shared or public vision that is in alignment with your practices.
You know, Christy, I'm really glad. I don't know, you said a word that made me think about this. And as I'm listening and thinking to myself, if I'm almost 98% of school systems listening right now, I'm going to go, oh my gosh, we're not very inclusive. Okay.
Mm.
That's step one is to realize that maybe when I thought I was inclusive or we were really inclusive, we're not as inclusive as we thought we should be. Now, this isn't the goal to feel shame or to feel like, oh, you know what, this isn't going to be our reality. It's to go, where do we start? Okay. When I think about our theater program, I can find no students with significant disabilities in our theater program. That is a place to start. And so when we reveal these things to you, listener, the goal is to say, all right, we can find then the places to make action happen, to create more inclusive spaces and places.
So I love that, Julie, because this is where we can pause for a minute and talk about the download and additional ways to get support before we move on to the rest of the 7 indicators.
Hmm.
So I love how you said this is not a time to feel shame or say we're the exception or yeah, but, or we have to do it, or our IEP says, because like IEPs don't talk, but we hear that all the time. So Julie and I have an event coming up. It's a virtual event for leaders, and it's really built upon The Way to Inclusion, the book, and it's a book club. And so we have these 5 virtual sessions that Julie and I are leading. So we're co-authors of the book, and we're thinking about, oh yeah, we have all these real life indicators, Julie, but what are some like actual solutions? We're hinting at a few today, and we'll put some in the show notes. But what are the actual levers that will get us not to be only 48% pregnant, if you will? How do
Mhm.
we become truly inclusive? What are additional examples, or what are other districts doing to overcome these systems level? Can we talk to other administrators? Can we hear from people who have had success? So, if that sounds exciting, which we hope it does, and useful, we invite you all to register. And upon registering for our summer event, which we can talk about and the details, it's called the Way to Inclusion Wednesdays, because they're all on Wednesdays in June and July. You will get two things immediately: our facilitator's guide for the book and a self-study guide for the book. So, those are two ways that you can start putting the book into action. So, Julie, I'll tell them where to register and get the
Yeah.
downloads, but you may want to add
Yeah.
something about the book club. So, to register or learn more about the dates and the series and get the two guides, go to inclusiveschooling.com/book hyphen club.
Okay, good. And I'm imagining that will be also in the show notes. So you can just go to the show notes and click right there. Um, what we want to tell you is this book club is going to be really exciting for many, many reasons. One is people from all over the US are already joining for it. So we put up the registration link last week, and people are already joining and are already excited about joining this book club. It will be live with the two of us, meaning you're going to be able to interact with us. You'll be able to ask real questions. The other thing I want to tell you is you'll be creating a community of like-minded leaders who are doing this work together. And I think that is an incredibly powerful thing. And we thought long and hard about when to offer it. So we thought we assumed, administrators, that June and July might be an okay time on Wednesday nights to get you together. And if you can't join us, you can also get the recorded sessions too. But all you have to do is register. So check it out. See if this is interesting to you. Please invite your colleagues. If you attend this book club with your entire team of administrators, I can promise you that is the biggest lever you can push to get your school to be more inclusive or your district to be more inclusive.
Perfect. Okay, let's go on to number four, and we'll speed through four and five. They're very similar, and then we'll finish you out with six and seven.
Okay, four and five. Four is you're not inclusive if your school has rooms organized by disability labels. So you might even have an autism program. You might even have a behavior room. You might even have something that's a little bit more coded called a life skills room, and that's for kids with intellectual disabilities. And so essentially, we want you to think about not organizing rooms, spaces, and places by disability label, but instead thinking about the concept of natural proportions, meaning if 12% of your kids have disabilities, you'd want 12% in every single classroom. And
And
the
then number five, you're not inclusive if, when you think about where are your staff, and oftentimes, Julie, we hear we would be more inclusive if we had more, and it's usually more special education teachers, more paraprofessionals, more staff. Totally could use in education more qualified staff, certainly, so that we can build relationships with students and all of that good stuff. But we know we're not inclusive if the current special education teachers that we do have work mostly in a pull-out setting. So in a resource room, or like you said, a life skills room, or in the autism program. And there's rarely any crossover or time to plan and work together, because we're spending half the day or 80% of the day in separate places doing separate things.
Yeah. And number six, you're not inclusive if the main strategy for supporting students with higher needs or more significant support needs is to add another paraprofessional. We see this often, and people think, I have the solution to how to best support this student with a significant disability, and we're going to hire more and more and more one-on-one paraprofessionals. Now, certainly we know that one-on-one paraprofessionals are sometimes needed or often needed in different ways, but just the hiring of another paraprofessional is not the solution to really good inclusion.
And Julie, I'll link in the show notes to our handout for leaders about why we're not going to be hiring more. And it helps understand that it's not about that they sorry, it's we understand the value that paras and teaching assistants bring. We also understand that the solution isn't more adults. So this one, you're not inclusive if we're on number 6, right, JC?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this idea of like offering support is by a human is actually just like one of several what ifs. So we're trying to do just 7 today, but in reality, this is chapter 6 and milestone number 6. And this is where a lot of our time will be spent diving into solutions because there are 5 powerful classroom practices. And how that gets played out in terms of co-teaching, differentiation, anticipating the range, how we think about support as a verb, how we think about the nervous system, all of that, Julie, is going to come into play when we think about how we utilize the humans, peers, and the environment.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, I'm going to jump to number 7, which is you know that you're not inclusive if inclusion starts out strong but fades when challenges show up. So you might have done all sorts of work, you're really clear on it, you're going to do it, it's going to be great. And then challenge after challenge after challenge inevitably will show up. But if you start immediately separating and segregating kids because you don't know what else to do, really is a common pitfall. And what we want people to do is hold strong to their value of inclusion, hold strong to their idea of inclusion, and then instead of tweaking the system and making it less inclusive, we want you to tweak the strategies and make them more inclusive.
And this is where we go into a deep dive too, Julie, because we talk a lot about in the book and in the book club about how people resist change, even if the idea was their own. And when discomfort happens, where do practices go? And then you and I both know there's a lot of turnover with leadership. Either because people are moving to different roles within the district, people are retiring, people are going to a different district. And then we don't want all of this progress we've made to be tied to a person. So how do we make this really something that is, as you talk about, the plate upon which all other initiatives? We just heard from that group yesterday that was like on the path to really investing in a lot of professional development around inclusion and then got derailed because of a new reading curriculum.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. And it's so disheartening to think about each of these things in such siloed ways. Instead, to say, hey, here's where we're investing. We're investing in all capital ALL students, and we're going to figure out how to make all reading curriculums inclusive. And so you balance any other initiatives onto the plate of inclusion. So, Christy, I just want to say to the listeners today, if this conversation is making you think, yep, that sounds like us, that sounds like me, that sounds like my colleagues, you're not alone. Okay. And that is exactly why we created the Way to Inclusion Book Club. It's a 5-part author facilitated by the two of us series, which is live, where we walk school leaders step by step through these milestones and go deep, deep into solutions. So you can learn more and register yourself, or better yet, please register your entire administrative team at inclusiveschooling.com/book-club. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and catch up on past episodes where we share valuable insights, straight talk, and practical steps to challenge outdated special education practices. You can find every episode with the show notes at inclusiveschooling.com/inclusion-podcast to build more inclusive schools together.